Hey everyone. So I get the inkling that you want to be a programmer. So this is not exactly a simple task. I mean, it's as simple as saying I want to be a carpenter or I want to be a college professor. It's a decision you make and then kind of defines the amount of effort you're going to have to put forward and kind of the path you're going to take to get there. But you've decided now you want to do it. So let me help you figure out the path you should take. And take it from me, I'm not an educator. I am a software engineer who's been doing this for, let's say 20 years, professionally for 10. So my goal is to give you kind of the roundabout way of how do I get involved with people? How do I find my niche? How do I make myself the most exciting software developer so that people want to hire me, so that I'll enjoy myself, and more importantly, so I'll be able to develop quickly. Today's age is not like when I started. When I started, I was sitting in my room. I was 8. It was the 90s. I had a book from the 70s. No internet. Nothing. It was what I could do with my own brain and some support from my parents, which is what allowed me to get to where I am today. But, of course, today's different. Kids have a lot more opportunities. Men and women, and I shouldn't even say kids. Recently I did a Facebook post that I boosted trying to attract women to my meetup. And I found that the women who were interested, more in any case than not, were between the ages of 25 and 45. Which to me strikes me as a very different demographic than I was expecting. I was expecting college students, the 16 to the 24 range. But really what I found is people who've probably already had a career, or maybe went to college late, and now are willing to change careers, or hopefully finally pick one up. And being a developer is a great way to do it. So let's start from the very beginning. You've decided you want to be a developer. What steps do you do next? Well, we have some prerequisite tools we're probably going to need, right? We need access to a computer, and we probably need access to some learning resources. So, my favorite part about being involved in a self-taught programmer group on Facebook is that the question of what computer should I get actually comes up pretty often. And if this was 5 years ago, I'd have said, whatever you get, it has to be running Linux. Otherwise, you're going to be a sad panda and nothing is ever going to go your way, and you're going to wish that you hadn't done this. And I'm a little bit, 5 years ago, I was very anti-Microsoft. I thought Visual Studio was effectively the bane on the development industry, and that software houses that strictly enforced that Visual Studio was the only tool they could use was a real mistake. Now, that's changed dramatically in 5 years, and that's exactly the reason why it's become so much more difficult, I think, than even when I started to be a software developer. How does one do this? So, first thing is you need to figure out if you have something that's strong enough, fast enough to write code on. And hey, guess what? You got one of these, you got an iPhone, doesn't matter. You can do it. There's enough platforms out there if you have the money that you can code online and really never have a local development environment. Now, you're probably not willing to spend an awful lot of startup capital on getting yourself involved with this, maybe because you're transitioning jobs and there's other bills that got to be paid. So in that case, any laptop will do, any desktop will do. More important than the desktop or the laptop, whatever hardware, even if you do it on an iPad, is how do you find the answers to your problems? That's really what is going to be the kicker for you. Now, a slower computer is going to mean that you're going to spend more time possibly compiling the language you're working in, or installing patches, or installing dependencies. A slower computer will take longer, but realistically, you're starting out, your code is going to be, no offense, none too impressive. So we shouldn't really concern ourselves with those things unless you plan on deciding to jump right into, hey, I decided to be a developer and then try to be a game programmer. Now that's possible, but I would probably advise against it initially. Now if you can get yourself involved with a group of people who are doing this, then you'll probably show a lot of success. And not obviously your mileage may vary, but an individual just learning this new technique of being a developer with no prior experience, if you're in the place where you're asking the question about what computer I should get, starting off with game development is awfully complicated. There's a lot of math concepts in there that, while you don't need to know to be successful, would be helpful to know before you start. And there are recently a lot of interesting frameworks that simplify a lot of those tasks, like the Unreal Engine and Unity. And you can get pretty far in those and know very little, and even have pretty good success as a newbie. So I don't want to dissuade you from trying it. I just want you to have the proper expectations that that's a big challenge. And if you don't immediately do well at it, don't kick yourself and think you're a failure. That's probably the biggest message that I can give you at any time about this. You are going to fail a lot. This is not something that your brain was necessarily wired for naturally. Maybe it was, but most of us, we have to kind of retrain, rethink about how this process of developing software is going to go, and it's a lifelong endeavor. There's no Sam's 21 days to Java. I mean, just throw that out. You'll get some information in 21 days if you stick with the book, but you're not going to be a developer that has experience based on that one instance. So let's talk about learning materials. You got a computer, you've decided you want to be a developer. Now it's time to figure out what language and what book to pick. So my ultimate belief is that these days books don't always hold the right value. I believe that the person who's best served by purchasing a book is a person who actually already has some experience with a particular language and now wants to gain some specialization in it. I believe that the books that focus on specialization of a language or an architecture tend to be more timeless. Those things are less likely to change, whereas let's pick a language that I work in a lot, which is Ruby. When I started, Ruby was at version 1.8. This was probably, 4 years ago now? And we're talking about features in 2.5 and 3.0 that are dramatically different. That said, I did read the book on the Ruby language after I'd learned the language, and I really gained a lot of amazing knowledge about it. But had I started out with that book, I don't know if I'd have stuck with that language. I don't know if that would have been the right way to go. So, I think that the online resources that are available now are really the key. If you don't know anything about programming, then we want to start with tutorials. And I'm going to list a bunch in the comments, or in the video description. But some of them right off the top of my head are, if you're picking a particular language, especially if it's a dynamic language, that falls in the category of things like Python and Ruby and JavaScript and things that generally don't have to be compiled. Now, this is not 100% the case anymore. It's really easy to go to that language's website or the companion website that's probably being managed by that language and actually use a REPL, which stands for Read, Evaluate, Print, and Loop. It's kind of like a line-by-line interpreter, which lets you try out each line of your program and actually get to see formal results at the end. If you've fooled around the internet at this point, you may have noticed the Apple language Swift, which has a thing called the Playground. Now, you probably don't have access to this unless you own a Mac already, which means this may be moot. But that's Apple's version of a compiled language as REPL. And you're going to find that as an introductory person, any language that includes a feature like that, where you can directly interact with the language and get immediate feedback about your inputs, you're going to learn a lot more about programming a lot faster. So, outside of the language-specific ones, you can always fall back to things like Treehouse has a large number of them, and Coursera, for example, will teach you specific languages. There's the Harvard online courses and also the Stanford ones. And also the Rice College in Pennsylvania has a large number of introductory courses that they give away online. Some of those are through their website, through Coursera, or through the, I think the Apple University podcast will also include them. So plenty of videos to watch, plenty of introductory stuff. But here's the truth. You can read a book, you can watch a video, and you can take a course. If you don't actually apply those skills at some point, and rather frequently, you really won't gain the true understanding of what you're working on. So, this leads to, I need to solve a problem. In most cases, as a software developer, my goal is to find a problem to solve. Or I'm presented with a problem thanks to my project manager, and I get to go ahead and work on that. If without the problem, though, the code isn't really any use. It's like if I don't need a house, then I don't need any wood to build the walls or a roof. I don't have to solve the problem of how to support the roof. So we need to have a foundational issue that we need to solve. Now, I have to admit, and this is personal, I absolutely fail at coming up with problems for myself. A project I want to build, a product I want to build. I've never been inspired in that manner. So I find others. Really, of all the things that I've taught you at this point, the only thing that actually matters is if you can find someone else to talk to. So what I want to teach you next is I want to teach you how to talk to someone like me who's been doing this for years, who has a hard time understanding how you think now. And that seems weird. Software engineers in general, across all industries, across all types, so from web developers to application developers to people who've transitioned into management, most of them, in my experience, unless they outright tell you that they don't want to teach you anything, love to talk about what they do. But here's the problem. They don't necessarily all want to teach you how to do it because they feel there's a certain amount of self-study that is integral to the career path that you've picked. So, if you're interacting with someone like me, who has been doing this for so long that I don't even remember what it was like to not understand it, and what mental processes I had to adapt in order to become proficient in this, there's some interesting things that you need to keep aware of. When we give you short answers or tell you to Google it, we're not trying to jerk you around, I promise you. We're literally just telling you what we do on the average day. That is 100% the first solution to all of our problems. So we see that we need to build something that we've never built before. So we kind of try to formulate that into a useful string of words, usually including the language in there. And we throw it into Google, and then we usually end up at a Stack Overflow page where someone has done something almost the same. And we then have to take our time to interpret that new problem that they've solved and see if it applies to the problem that we have. We in no way are trying to brush you off. Now, your mileage will vary and everyone's a little bit different. But I do think that on average, we're just trying to help you figure out that the information is out there and that you can approach it yourself, of course. So, when someone tells you to do that, and that's not enough, maybe you should learn how to query things in the way that we do. And that is extremely helpful. So, because we're computer programmers, we kind of think how computers think. And Google, for example, the search engine was also built by computer programmers who really tried to teach a computer the way we think, but somewhere at the underlying structure of that is people trying to adapt our thoughts who think like the way computers think to think the way other people think. Okay, right, so if I drew a Venn diagram of that, it would just be like a donut. So, it means that if you talk to Google a little bit like a developer, Google will give you better results. So here's my pattern, and here's my way of doing it. I include nothing but nouns, and occasionally a linking verb. The pattern will start with the language in which I want the solution for. So I would like to figure out how to make a web server in JavaScript. I will put JavaScript or Node, depending on my platform. And then I will say web server, command line web server, or web server implementation. That's it, nothing else. And then I will look for probably the first Stack Overflow response. There are a couple of other websites out there like Expert Exchange and a couple of MSDN, Microsoft kind of branded variations, and they can sometimes have the answer. And I'm just telling you that more likely than not, the answer you're looking for will be on Stack Overflow. Aside from that, if the query you're searching for doesn't really yield you positive results, there's probably two reasons. First is, it's been documented very visually within the language you're working in, that it's so obvious no one's talking about it, or you can't do that. That's a good clue to throw on. So if you've tried a couple of queries and they're returning you nothing, the next step you should take if you think this is really a possible thing is actually go right to the source. Go right to the language and ask the question somewhere closer to that. So in the JavaScript sense, we might go to NPM. We might search npm package for web server. And probably at that point we'll find connect and express. Now, this particular query in which I'm posing to you should have been 100% the easiest thing to search by itself. And I use it as an example because as your problems become more esoteric, that means that the queries are going to become more likely you're going to hit those edges, hit those boundaries. Now, the next part about talking to and communicating with a developer who's already got plenty of experience is don't say what your problem is. Say you hop in a Slack channel and you're having a problem with a particular error on a page. Don't just kind of paraphrase that error into chat, because the next thing that the developers are going to ask you for is either the full error or some code. Just skip this. Just jump ahead. If your project that you're working on isn't already on GitHub, put it there. You're not wasting any effort. Its version control is always going to save you a lot of time. And when you need to clue someone into the problem you're having, you can just hand them the entire code base. Now, I know there may be some thoughts that, you're inventing something which is very unique and possibly marketable, and I can understand that. But as a beginner, it's unlikely that you're realistically going to build something that is not already in existence. Now, I'm not trying to say that you guys aren't clever, because you probably are, probably more so than me even. But don't try to avoid the ego piece. And most of the time, there's a rule that other developers really aren't going to try to steal your stuff, because there's an obvious amount of effort that needs to be placed in it in order to copy it, which they're not going to have time for. So, obviously use your best judgment, but I think that finding a way to share that code with the developers you're asking help for will not only make them appreciate you and want to be more helpful and more responsive, but it saves you the embarrassment. So, you hop in the chat, you express that you're experiencing error, copy it exactly, maybe post a screenshot of the error, and a link to the source code all at the same time. People are going to jump on that, try to help you. Always make sure the source code you're providing is in a runnable state. So, mostly free from errors in case other errors, aside from the one that maybe you're trying to deal with. And in most cases, the other developers who have experience aren't going to try to even run your code. They're going to be able to read it, and by just reading it, they're going to be able to head execute that right in their mind to tell you what the problem probably is, because the likelihood is your problem is probably common and easy for them to locate. So now we've got an understanding of, one, where do we get our information when we're trying to search for ourselves or when someone tells us to go search for it ourselves, and how do we make when we can't find it and we can't solve the problem on our own, how do we bring in someone else for help? We're going to be quite effective. You're going to find that you're going to need to ask for help less because the answer the developer is going to give you is probably going to be pretty robust, maybe even worse than you understand. Your goal is to try to absorb it without understanding it. Don't rabbit trail onto what does that mean if it doesn't really contextually affect the solution to the answer. Our brains have a great ability to absorb information that even we don't understand or comprehend and still classify it properly within the right region. And then over time, you're going to encounter ancillary issues that bring up certain terminology, and then eventually, you're just going to put it all together automatically. You're just going to build those pathways yourself. So don't worry about it if you don't know all the details. Solve the problem so that you can move on to the next problem. The only thing that's ever going to keep you from advancing is if you never actually move on from the problem. The average developer's lifestyle is really just a lot of problems. You're going to start out with no understanding of what you're doing. You're going to struggle through errors, hoping that the error continuously changes until there are no errors. You're then going to verify that you actually solved the problem. There'll be a tiny moment of rejoicing, and then on to the next. And that kind of resilience and expectation that your average life is really just, I need to solve the problem, and the solution is not the thing I celebrate, but the path to the solution is what we enjoy. When you get to that point, you're going to start building things. And as the system gets bigger and more complicated, those additional pathways are going to be built for you. And you're just going to understand, you're going to comprehend what's happening. Now, that said, it's perfectly fine to ask questions, but it's more important to ask questions that have context. Because unfortunately, in this field you've decided to enter, it's not all cut and dry. The why I do this over here is not actually the same reason why I might do this elsewhere. There might be different ways that you might approach a problem if you're doing a system language like Rust versus a web language like web framework like Ruby on Rails or JavaScript. There's different problems and there's different overall structures in the language that you don't understand yet. So don't try to kick yourself too much if you don't get the whole thing the first time. Just practice and build things so that you can get to the next issue. The last issue that you probably need to know about dealing with developers is that they are probably not going to want to write, I should rephrase that. There's a risk that they're just going to want to write it for you. They don't want to, but the time it takes versus the language that would be needed to express how to solve maybe a slightly complicated problem without confusing you is their concern. So sometimes it's okay if they want to provide you a total solution. You show them the code, they provide you a rewritten version. Hopefully they haven't rewritten it completely. Don't just incorporate their code. See that their code works, and then try to see what's different. I know that the short-term gain is, oh, I have it, now it works, but you haven't learned anything. And that's really the whole point of this. So take the working code. It's in fact the exact same reason that all day we're spending Stack Overflow looking at someone else's variant to our problem. We want to learn why our initial concept that didn't work can now be solved by someone else's solution. We know we can't use their code because it's not the same problem. And that should be the same way you approach it. Even though, yes, another developer has given you the perfect solution, which you probably will not write better yourself at your current level, that's okay. If you can learn what was different about their code and your code, and then implement the correct solution, you're going to be better tuned and your mind will be better trained to get you to the place where when you're a professional, when you're actually getting paid to do this, you will know how to solve the problem yourself and you'll be super efficient at it. I kind of wish to some extent that the community of developers spent more time training us to kind of think about the concerns of our educational process. But since we are like carpenters in the end, our big goal is to get the work done. And really that's why a lot of us get paid the big bucks. So how you got there doesn't really matter, but it should, and we should care about it. So at this point, you should be able to pick a language to start with, and guess what? It doesn't matter. Just pick one. If you don't like it, try another one. The resources will be there. Pick the language, put it on your computer, get everything started up, and then go find help. Okay, here's the last piece. Going to a chat room, talking to developers is great, but sometimes it can be hit or miss, which means that really what you need to find is a mentor. If you can communicate well enough, and more importantly, go to meetups, and understand the audience that you're talking to when you're talking to a developer, and not be a drag by asking too many questions or over-consuming their time, they're going to be very willing to help you. They're going to be super willing to give you advice. And they'll even meet up with you and hang out with you. They may even help you get an internship at some point. This is where the community building aspect of any industry is extremely important. So, after you've picked your language and after you've got yourself started and now you want to do something really critical with these skills, find other people to work with. They don't have to be smarter than you. They don't have to be newer than you. They just need to be other people to bounce ideas off. Most of us work in teams, so might as well start that way as you're learning. A good concept is called a learning circle, where the group picks a problem and there's no one who's in charge of teaching it. Now, one person may know the problem better than another, but the hope is that as a group, you're going to solve the problem together. This advocates collaboration, hopefully on GitHub, so that you're learning Git, so that when you get that first job and they say on the requirements that you know version control, you're going to be all big old thumbs up on that. And don't be surprised. This is a big deal. I apply for jobs even now at my tenure level, and one of the requirements is often, do you have experience with version control? Now, I know that that's going to fall away, but as of right now, it's not something they teach, which means you're going to have to learn it yourself. So, here's what I'd like you to do. If you're out there and you're getting started, I'd love to hear your story. So send me a video or write how you got started or what inspired you to get started. And because I'm going to probably put these together in a little collage, because part of this video is really just an amalgamation of things I've been interacting with other people about in the first place. And I'd love to see how this community off of Facebook, for example, really feels about it. I mean, YouTube's a wonderful resource, but I feel that there's a possibility here through live streaming for you to give me a problem you'd like to see solved, and then I can just do it. I can do it live. And that's a really exciting concept to me. So I'm going to use your how did you get into this to help myself, since I'm not particularly good at defining problems on my own, to figure out a way to identify what content I should probably try to shoot for in helping you guys get started. If it's a particular language and getting over the hump of how do I get Python working in a particular version? You know, how do I use virtual env burrito, for example? Should I try to install Ruby on Windows Subsystem for Linux? Should I even bother going that route? What distribution should I pick for a VM, or should I dual boot? These are lots of questions I'd like to help you guys solve. So let me know what kind of problems you're having, and really what inspired you to get started in the first place, because I know that I just loved doing it. I couldn't think of anything else I'd want to do. I had a computer, and I wanted to bang on that keyboard. Of course, I now thankfully get to do that as a job, and so can you. And hopefully, it won't take you 15 years to get to a point where you're going to be able to ramp up rapidly, and we can just start from here, where you can make the decision to join, put the effort forth, and you don't have to have the incredible resilience to keep on doing it and struggling. We can just make you awesome, because I think you will be. So, lovely talking to you. Thanks.